Last week we talked about our desire to love life and to see good days. And as Peter says, in order to do that, we need to seek peace and pursue it. Whether it's with our spouse or with our coworker, our friends and family, or with our brothers and sisters in Christ or our children, or with our enemy. We've got to choose the path that leads to peace. And so that means there are some things that we ought to be doing, some things on our part that we've got to do. And Peter points out some of those. And we talked about our need for unity and sympathy last week. We're going to break down the rest of the verse and look at the rest of it. The next thing he says, we need to have brotherly love. One of our biggest problems in the heat of the moment when we're in a fight is that we're hurt. And our judgment becomes cloudy and we start to lose sight of the one thing that ought to be governing us this entire time. Love. And so that's why Ephesians 4, Paul says we ought to take off things like malice and envy and slander, and hatred. And we need to put on things like kindness and patience and forgiveness and love. And when we do that, we're going to be at peace with others. But the next thing he says we need is to be tenderhearted. And so instead of responding with vengeance, which might be our immediate response, that's God's part. We need to be moved with compassion. Last week we talked about sympathy, putting ourselves in someone else's shoes and trying to figure out why they feel the way that they feel and why they're hurt. But compassion is what moves us to do something about their hurt. And so we have this example of this Good Samaritan who saw this Jewish man who hated the Samaritans laying on the side of the road, beaten and left half dead. And yet it says he was moved with compassion. He's moved to do something about his hurt. And so when we're tenderhearted like that, we're going to be at peace with others. The next thing he says we need is humility. Perhaps one of the greatest stumbling blocks in attaining peace and applying any of these things we're talking about is our pride and our arrogance. After all, they hurt me. They ought to be begging for my forgiveness. They ought to be telling everybody about just how badly they treated me. But not everything's about me. And like Christ, we need to be putting others above ourselves. And as Christians, we cannot be thinking more highly of ourselves than we should be. And when we do that, we can be at peace. But the last one is the one that I think is the hardest to apply. It's the one that I wish was not on the list, but it is. And that is when I need to be treating others the way that Peter's talking about, even when they're not treating me that way. Look what he says. Do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. For to this you are called, that you may obtain a blessing. Jesus is our greatest example. He was reviled, but did not revile in return. He suffered, but did not threaten. He simply fully submitted himself to God the Father. And that's what we have to do as well.